The great conclave chamber of the Cathar consortium hummed with a silence more profound than the void between galaxies. It was a resonant quiet, woven from the controlled energies that held the floating dais in place, from the crystalline architecture that sang with the faint light of a captured star, and from the millennia of tradition that steeped the very air in gravitas. But today, another silence pressed in from the outside, a suffocating absence that chilled the ancient beings assembled upon the dais. It was the silence of the Orion Arm, a sector of space that had for generations been a source of escalating, unspoken terror. High Scion Valerius, his form a shimmering cascade of iridescent light contained within a polished obsidian frame, felt the silence as a physical weight upon his consciousness. His role was that of foresight, to perceive the branching pathways of the future, yet when he turned his perception toward the silent sector, he found only a void. Not darkness, not emptiness, but a perfect and absolute nullity of information, a causal wall his precognitive senses could not breach. It was this nothingness that was so terrifying. Before him, the other aspects of the conclave resonated with their own anxieties. Lyra, the aspect of preservation, her form a rigid, unyielding lattice of silver and white, pulsed with a sharp, cutting frequency of indignation and fear. For the last cycle, we have watched this anomaly fester. An entire spiral arm, once a cacophony of primitive radio signals and clumsy expansion, has gone dark. The species known as humanity, a race defined by its chaotic, violent, and relentless growth, simply stopped. This is not cessation. This is not peace. This is preparation. It is the deadly quiet before a storm we cannot comprehend, and to continue this policy of passive observation is to invite our own extinction. Her thoughts were projected not as words, but as a wave of pure, unassailable conviction that washed over the chamber, carrying with it images of Cathar worlds burning, of their long, placid history shattered by a tidal wave of unreasoning aggression. She painted humanity as a predator holding its breath before the final, lethal strike. Countering her wave was the cool, analytical pulse of Xyler, the aspect of logic. His form was a simple, elegant sphere of pure, unwavering blue light, his frame unadorned. Preservation's fear is noted, but it is not supported by the data. We have maintained a perimeter of deep-field sensors around the human sphere of influence for the duration of this great silence, as the archivists have named it. There are no signs of military buildup. No unusual energy signatures consistent with weapon development on a galactic scale. Their expansion did not collapse, it concluded. They reached a certain volume of space and then turned inward. Their worlds are active, their energy consumption stable. All we observe is a profound, and admittedly unsettling, lack of outward-facing activity. To act preemptively against a threat that has offered no provocation would be a violation of the first tenet of stability. It would be an act of chaos, the very thing our consortium was formed to prevent. Xyler's projection was a stream of star charts, energy graphs, and temporal flow diagrams, all showing the same thing, a civilization that had simply chosen to be quiet. Valerius felt the tension between the two poles of thought, the ancient Cathar dichotomy of fear versus reason. It was a conflict that had defined their civilization for longer than humanity had possessed sentient thought. The Cathar were old, so very old. They had witnessed the birth and death of countless empires. They had seen fiery, expansive races burn themselves out in glorious, feudal wars, and they had seen quiet, contemplative species fade into obscurity, their philosophies lost to the uncaring void. But they had never seen anything like humanity. They had catalogued the species' rise with a mixture of academic curiosity and paternalistic concern. They had watched their primitive broadcasts, a chaotic storm of art, war, love, and hatred. They had observed their first clumsy steps into space, their rapid, violent colonization of their home system, and their aggressive leap to nearby stars. The humans were a firestorm, a biological imperative to grow and consume, seemingly unchecked by logic or long-term planning. The consortium had marked them for eventual containment, a chaotic variable that would, in time, need to be constrained for the good of galactic stability. And then, without warning, the firestorm had contained itself. The noise ceased, the expansion halted, the great silence began. The logic is sound, yet it feels hollow, Valerius projected, his own resonance a deep, sonorous hum that calmed the agitated frequencies in the chamber. Logic dictates that a species so defined by outward momentum does not simply abandon its nature. It evolves or it suppresses I. If they have evolved, what have they become? If they have suppressed it, what pressure builds behind the dam? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. My senses, which have guided this consortium through the rise of the Glyptodont hegemony and the Void Singer crisis, see nothing. This is unprecedented. It is a blindness that suggests either a power far beyond our own, capable of shielding its future from even the subtlest precognitive probe, or a state of being so alien to our own that it does not register on the plane of causality we inhabit. He let his thoughts drift over the conclave, a current of pure, unadulterated dread. I fear the quiet far more than I ever feared their noise. The debate continued, a slow, majestic dance of philosophies that had guided a galactic power for eons. They spoke of the nature of emergent intelligence, of the statistical inevitability of aggressive expansion, and of the philosophical implications of a species that could so radically alter its own fundamental drive. Lyra argued that humanity's violent past was the only reliable data they possessed. She projected images from their own history, brutal wars fought over ideology, resources, even simple pride. She showed them the terrible beauty of their atomic fire, the cold efficiency of their orbital weapons. This is their truth, her thoughts insisted. A quiet predator is still a predator. It is merely a more patient one. They are gathering strength, unifying their chaotic factions under a single, silent banner, preparing for a campaign this galaxy has never witnessed. We must breach their silence now, with overwhelming force, before they are ready to breach ours. Xyler countered with projections of humanity's other side, the side Lyra so easily dismissed. He showed their art, their music, their moments of profound self-sacrifice and compassion. He displayed the complex, evolving philosophies that questioned the very nature of their own aggression. Their history is not a straight line of violence, but a spiral of conflict and resolution. They fight, they learn, they rebuild, they philosophize. What if this great silence is not a prelude to war, but the result of a final, internal resolution? What if they have conquered the one enemy that has always plagued them, themselves? To strike such a species would be the greatest tragedy in the history of the galaxy. It would be to extinguish a light we have not yet begun to understand. The weight of decision settled back onto Valerius. Foresight was his burden, and he was blind. Reason offered a path of peace, but it was a path built on hope, not certainty. Preservation offered a path of security, but it was a path paved with xenophobia and potential atrocity. He felt the immense, crushing weight of his civilization's future resting on this single, impossible choice. He extended a part of his consciousness toward the empty sector on the holographic map that dominated the center of the chamber. He saw not a collection of stars and worlds, but a hole in the fabric of what is to be, a wound in time itself. We cannot act with force, for we risk becoming the monsters we fear, but we can no longer remain passive, for we risk annihilation through our own inaction. His resonance deepened, filling the conclave with a sense of finality. We will not send a fleet. We will not send an ultimatum. We will send a single, unarmed vessel, a witness. It will cross their self-imposed border, and it will simply observe. Its purpose is not to spy, but to be seen. It will be an offering of trust, a question posed to the silence. How they react to this lone, vulnerable vessel will tell us more than 1,000 long-range scans. Lyra's form flared with sharp, angry light. A sacrifice. You would send our people into the heart of the anomaly with no defense? This is not foresight, it is folly. It is a calculated risk, Xyler countered calmly, his blue light soothing the chamber. A single unarmed vessel is not a threat. It is a gesture. It forces the humans to reveal their intentions. If they destroy it, we have our answer, and we will have lost little. If they ignore it, we learn more about the nature of their silence. If they communicate, then the future, for the first time in a century, will begin to unspool. Valerius held his resonance steady, his decision made. The path was chosen. It was a terrifying, uncertain path, a single step into an absolute darkness, but it was a step forward. The witness will be prepared. It will carry the full archives of our history, our philosophies, our hopes for a stable and peaceful galaxy. It will be a message in a bottle cast into a silent sea. Let us pray the tides are gentle. The conclave fell into a contemplative quiet, the hum of the chamber now a somber note of anticipation. Far away, in the cold, silent depths of space, a vessel was being consecrated for a journey into the greatest unknown the Cathar had ever faced. Its mission was sea. Empli, and its purpose was absolute, to break the deadly quiet and to learn what disaster or what salvation lay waiting on the other side. The journey of the witness vessel, the Stellari Inquisitor, was a study in existential dread. It was a sliver of polished chrome and crystal, designed not for speed or for battle, but for pure, unadulterated observation. Its crew consisted of a single Cathar consciousness, a specialist of first contact named Alara, whose own form was integrated into the vessel's core systems. She was, in essence, the ship itself. As she slipped through the dimensional folds that passed for FTL travel in the consortium, she felt the oppressive weight of her mission. She was the question Valerius had posed to the universe, and she did not know if the answer would be her own silent, instantaneous annihilation. The transition from folded space back to the normal continuum was always seamless, a gentle unfurling of reality. But this time it felt different. As the stars resolved into sharp, clear points of light, she felt it. The silence. It was not merely a lack of radio transmissions. It was a profound stillness in the quantum foam, a smoothing of the background radiation, a sense of order. It was as if a region of space trillions of cubic light-years in volume was holding its breath. Her sensors, the most advanced the consortium could create, swept the system she had entered. It was a star system on the very edge of the human sphere, designated by their primitive nomenclature as TRAPPIST-1. The star was a dim, red dwarf, its light a faint, moody crimson against the black. But it was the planets that drew her full attention. They were all there, as the old charts indicated, but they were transformed. What had once been designated as barren rocks or tenuous gas-shrouded worlds were now encased in shimmering, semi-transparent shells of energy. Intricate patterns of light flowed across their surfaces, suggesting unimaginable feats of engineering and energy management. There were no fleets, no orbital defenses, no bustling spaceports. There was only this silent, breathtaking artistry. She focused her sensors on one of the inner worlds. Through the energy shell, she could perceive a world that had been fully reshaped. Its atmosphere was a perfect, stable composition. Its surface was a mosaic of verdant forests, crystalline cities that seemed to have grown from the planet's crust, and oceans of liquid water so clear they revealed the sculpted topography of the seabed below. It was a paradise. A silent, perfect, and utterly unnerving paradise. Alara broadcast the standard consortium greeting, a complex sequence of mathematical primes and universal physical constants designed to establish a baseline for intelligent communication. She sent it on all frequencies, from simple radio waves to modulated gravity waves. She waited. The silence that answered was absolute. There was no reply, no automated warning, nothing. She was a trespasser in a garden of the gods, and the gardeners did not seem to care. This was a deeper mystery than the conclave had imagined. It was not the silence of a predator lying in wait. It was the silence of a being so profoundly advanced, so utterly self-contained, that the arrival of a lesser creature was a matter of complete and total indifference. Or so she thought. For a moment she felt a flicker of something, a brush against her consciousness that was not Cathar, not a thought projected by resonance, but something else entirely. It was a feeling, an impression, a sense of being perceived not by a machine but by a mind. Then it appeared, with no flash of light, no dimensional distortion, no tearing of space-time. One moment there was empty space before her, the next there was a ship. It was small, a fraction of her own vessel's size, and its design was a thing of impossible elegance and simplicity. It was a smooth, ovoid shape of a material that seemed to drink the light of the nearby star, a perfect, matte black that gave no sensor reflection. It did not hail her. It did not power up weapons. It simply hung there in the void, a black tear in the fabric of space. It was a statement. We are here, we see you. The next move is yours. A cold tendril of fear and emotion her training was meant to suppress coiled through Alara's consciousness. This was it, the moment of truth. The question was being answered. Following her directives, she transmitted her vessel's full manifest and purpose. She explained her peaceful intent, her mission to understand the great silence. She projected the consortium's offer of dialogue, a hope for mutual understanding between two of the galaxy's elder races. Again, there was only silence from the black ship, but the feeling of being perceived intensified. It was not a hostile scan, not a brute force psychic probe. It was more like a gentle, curious gaze. It was a mind looking at another mind, attempting to understand its very structure, its motivations, its fears. And then a message came. It was not broadcast on any channel her systems could detect. It appeared directly within her consciousness, translated perfectly into the conceptual language of the Cathar. It was not a voice, but a stream of pure, unadorned meaning. We are humanity. The silence is a choice. We have been waiting. The message was calm. It was devoid of emotion, yet it was not cold. It held a weight of immense patience, of a timescale that dwarfed the Cathar's own long history. Waiting, Alara queried back, her own thoughts clumsy and slow by comparison. Waiting for what? The reply was just as simple and just as profound. For you, for others, for the question to be asked. Another vessel appeared identical to the first, and another, and another. Soon a small gathering of the black, silent ships surrounded her, not in a threatening posture, but in a formation that suggested a welcome and escort. Your vessel is designated Witness. It is an appropriate title. We invite you to bear witness to our answer. Will you come? Alara felt the future once a black wall began to crack open. A single, thin ray of light was shining through. This was not a prelude to war. This was something else entirely, something far stranger and more significant. She had her orders. The conclave had to know, but she also had a mission to understand. The two were now intertwined. With a sense of stepping off a cliff into a new reality, she sent her reply, "We will come." The black ships shifted in perfect unison, their silent forms parting to create a path for her, a path leading deeper into the heart of the human enigma toward a destination unknown. The deadly quiet had been broken not by the roar of cannons, but by a simple, terrifyingly calm invitation. The conclave chamber was a storm of silent, conflicting energies. Alara's reports, transmitted through a series of quantum-entangled relays, had thrown the ancient council into a state of profound disarray. The images of the terraformed worlds, the silent black ships, the direct, unnervingly placid communication from the humans, it was all too much to process. It fit none of their established models for civilizational development. They were not predators. They were not isolationists. They were something else. Lyra, the aspect of preservation, saw a trap of unimaginable sophistication. They invite us into their den, disarmed and alone. They show us their power, their mastery over matter and energy, all while speaking of peace. This is a display of dominance, a psychological tactic to lull us into complacency before they strike. We must recall the witness. We must fortify our borders. This is a new form of warfare, one fought in the mind. Xyler, however, was transfixed by the data. Their technology is seamless. There is no waste heat, no gravitational shear. Their method of propulsion is undetectable. This is not the engineering of a warrior race. The energy expenditure required to build weapons is crude, inefficient. This is the technology of artists, of philosophers. They are not showing us their strength. They are showing us their nature. They are answering our question not with words, but with a demonstration of what they have become. High Scion Valerius felt himself torn between the two extremes. The blindness in his foresight had receded, but what replaced it was a fog of possibilities, each more disquieting than the last. The humans were no longer an unknown variable. They were an unsolvable equation. He gave the order for a delegation to be assembled. He would lead it himself. Foresight demanded he be present to see with his own senses what lay at the heart of the great silence. Lyra protested, calling it a suicidal act of appeasement, but the conclave, swayed by Xyler's logic and the sheer, overwhelming evidence of a power that defied their understanding, consented. The risk of misunderstanding was now greater than the risk of engagement. A Cathar delegation vessel, larger than the Witness but just as unarmed, was dispatched. It was a ship of state, a vessel of diplomacy, and it followed the path blazed by Alara into the silent heart of human space. Their journey ended at a location that appeared on no star chart. It was a system with a dead star, a white dwarf that cast a pale, ghostly light into the void. And surrounding this dead star was the most breathtaking structure Valerius had ever conceived of. It was a sphere, a shell of black, light-absorbing material that completely enclosed the star, but it was not a solid object. It was a filigree of impossibly thin structures, a web of habitats, parks, and what looked like open voids to the star within, all held together by principles of physics that the Cathar had only theorized. It was not a Dyson sphere built for power. The dead star offered little of that. It was something else, a monument, a sanctuary. As they drew closer, guided by the silent black ships, they saw that the structure was not empty. It was teeming with life. And on a vast, open platform that extended into the void, a single figure was waiting for them. The Cathar delegation, including Valerius, Xyler, and a hesitant Lyra, materialized on the platform. Their forms shimmered, adjusting to the local atmosphere, which was a perfectly calibrated mix of inert gases. The human was a female of her species, clad in a simple, form-fitting gray suit that bore no rank or insignia. Her face was calm, her eyes holding a deep, ancient intelligence that seemed at odds with her species' short lifespan. There was no military guard, no array of officials. There was only her. She stood before them, a small, fragile-looking organic creature, yet she held the space with an aura of absolute serenity and command. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova," she said. Her voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a direct communication like the one Alara had received projected into their minds. It was clear, precise, and carried a tone of profound empathy. "Welcome, High Scion Valerius, aspect Xyler, aspect Lyra. We are honored by your presence. We know you have many questions. Please walk with me." She turned and began to walk along the platform, which seemed to be made of the same light-absorbing black material as the ships. The Cathar followed. Their towering, crystalline forms a stark contrast to her soft, biological one. "You call the period of our civilization you have been observing the Great Silence," she began, her thoughts flowing around them like a gentle current. "We call it the Great Contemplation. Your confusion is understandable. You saw a species defined by expansion and conflict suddenly fall quiet. You feared it was the quiet of a predator. The truth is that it was the quiet of a patient who has finally healed from a long and terrible illness." She gestured out toward the pale, dead star at the center of the sphere. "Our expansion was not a sign of strength, but of desperation. We were running from ourselves, from our own internal chaos, our tribalism, our fear of scarcity, our fear of death. We thought that by conquering the space outside of us, we could fill the emptiness within. We were wrong. We bloodied our hands on our own homeworld and carried that sickness to the stars. The violence you observed was the fever of that illness." They reached the edge of the platform, which overlooked a vast, open section of the sphere. Below them, Valerius could see entire ecosystems suspended in the void, forests and oceans contained within fields of energy, all bathed in the gentle light of the dead star. He could see humans, millions of them, living in quiet communities, engaging in art, science, and contemplation. There was no industry, no military, no sign of the frantic, grasping energy that had once defined them. "We reached a precipice," Rostova continued, her gaze distant. "We developed technologies that gave us the power to destroy galaxies, but we still possessed the minds of frightened primates. We saw that our trajectory led to only one of two outcomes, self-annihilation or a tyranny so absolute that it would extinguish the very spark that made us human. So we chose a third path. We stopped, all of us. We turned our science inward. We mapped our own consciousness. We unraveled the genetic knots of our own aggression. We confronted the philosophical paradoxes that had driven us to the brink. It was the hardest war we ever fought, and it was waged in the silence of every single human mind." Lyra pulsed with a sharp wave of disbelief. "You simply chose to stop being what you are. Such a radical transformation of a species' core nature is not possible. It is a deception." Rostova turned her calm gaze to Lyra. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, sorrowful understanding. "We did not stop being what we are. We chose to become what we could be. We did not erase our aggression or our fear. We integrated them. We understood them. They no longer rule us from the shadows of our subconscious. This," she gestured to the entire, magnificent sphere around them, "is not a fortress or a new homeworld. It is a memorial. We built it around this dead star to remind ourselves of the ultimate end of all blind ambition. A quiet, cold death. We live here, in a state of post-scarcity, post-conflict, to honor the memory of the billions who died while we were still learning this one simple lesson. The universe is not a territory to be conquered. It is a mystery to be understood." This was the first great reveal, a truth so profound it sent a shockwave through the Cathar delegation. Humanity's power was not military. It was psychological. It was ethical. They had achieved a level of species-wide self-awareness that the Cathar, for all their eons, had never even conceived of. They had not defeated an external enemy. They had achieved peace with themselves. Xyler, the aspect of logic, was the first to fully grasp T. He implications. "Your technology," he projected, his blue light soft with awe. "It is not focused on energy projection or material dominance. It is focused on control, subtlety. The shells around your worlds, the propulsion of your ships, it's all based on localized manipulation of space-time, isn't it? Not crude force, but a conversation with the fabric of reality itself." Rostova nodded. "Once we no longer needed to build walls or weapons, our science was free to pursue its true purpose, to see, to understand. We are not conquerors, we are not warriors, we have become observers, and that is why we were waiting for you." She turned her gaze back to Valerius, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something other than serenity in her eyes. It was a deep, ancient gravity, a seriousness that chilled him more than any threat of war. "You asked our vessel what we were waiting for," she said, her thoughts now directed at all of them, a message for the entire Cathar consortium. "We were waiting for a neighbor to become curious enough to ask why we were so quiet, because our silence, our great contemplation, was not just for our own healing. It was also in preparation. We were listening, and we heard something that you need to hear as well." She raised her hand, and the empty space before them shimmered. It resolved into a holographic display, but it was not a star chart or a tactical map. It was a waveform, a complex, repeating signal. It was ancient, faint, and utterly terrifying. "This is a signal we have been tracking for the duration of our silence. It does not originate from any single point in space. It seems to be an echo embedded in the very structure of spacetime. It is a pattern, and wherever this pattern appears strongest, we have observed a corresponding phenomenon. The display shifted. It showed a map of the galaxy, but it was a map that stretched back through time. It showed the locations of dozens of ancient, spacefaring civilizations that the Cathar themselves had catalogued in their long history, races that had vanished without a trace. The Glyptodont hegemony, the Void Singers, the crystalline architects. One by one, as the timeline advanced, a faint shimmer of the pattern would appear in their region of space, and then, shortly after, their entire civilization would simply vanish. No debris, no signs of war, just gone. An entire species erased from existence. "We do not believe this signal is a weapon," Rostova said, her voice a low, somber tone in their minds. "We believe it is a symptom, a harmonic resonance that precedes a naturally occurring cyclical cosmic event, a storm, a wave that washes the galaxy clean of complex life on a timescale so vast it is mistaken for random extinction events. We called your observation of us the deadly quiet before disaster. You were more right than you knew. The disaster is not us. It is coming for all of us. The signal has been growing stronger in this galactic quadrant for the last 1,000 years. According to our models, the next wave is imminent." The second and far greater reveal fell upon the Cathar like a physical blow. They had spent a century fearing a phantom, a predator they had invented out of their own anxieties. They had debated preemptive war and isolation, all while the real threat, a vast, impersonal, and unstoppable force of nature, gathered on their doorstep. Humanity's great silence was not an act of aggression. It was the act of a watchman on the wall, straining to hear the approaching footsteps of doom in the dark. Their inward focus had allowed them to perceive a danger that the outward-looking, ever-cautious Cathar had completely missed. Valerius looked at the small, fragile human before him and saw not a potential enemy, but a prophet. An oracle who had calmly waited for them to stop shouting long enough to hear her warning. The deadly quiet was not humanity's. It was the quiet of the entire galaxy, blissfully unaware that it was about to be erased. A new kind of silence descended upon the conclave chamber, a silence born not of fear of the unknown, but of the stark, terrible clarity of the known. Valerius, returned from the human memorial sphere, projected Ambassador Rostova's findings to the assembled aspects. The holographic waveform pulsed in the center of the room, a rhythmic, hypnotic harbinger of galactic-scale doom. The temporal map, showing the silent extinctions of civilizations far older and mightier than the Cathar, played on a loop, each vanishing star empire a testament to their own ignorance. They had been so focused on the perceived threat of a single, noisy species that they had failed to listen to the deep, structural silence of the cosmos, a silence that was, in fact, the sound of a recurring apocalypse. The very foundation of Cathar philosophy, that stability could be maintained through careful observation and control of other life forms, was shattered. The greatest threat was not Ife, but the mechanics of existence itself. Lyra, the aspect of preservation, was the most profoundly shaken. Her entire existence had been dedicated to protecting her people from external, sentient threats. Her fear of humanity had been a clear and definable focus, a blade she could sharpen. But this was an enemy with no mind, no motive, no fleet. It was a force of nature, as impersonal and as absolute as the death of a star. Her rigid crystalline form seemed to droop, the sharp points of her light softening into a diffuse, sorrowful glow. "We have spent generations staring at a single tree," she projected, her thoughts slow and heavy with the weight of her error, "while the entire forest was burning down around us. Our preservation has been a fool's errand, a child's game of building walls of sand against a rising tide." Xyler, ever the logician, was already processing the new data, his blue form pulsing with rapid, intense bursts of light. "The human models are sound. The correlation between the signal and the extinction events is statistically undeniable. The energy signature of the phenomenon, what little they can discern from the echoes, is consistent with a cascade failure of vacuum energy, a phase transition of spacetime itself. It's not an attack. It is a physical process, a culling. We have been living in the quiet season of a cosmic cycle, and the storm season is about to begin." Valerius felt the shift in the conclave, the dissolution of old fears and the birth of a new, far more profound unity of purpose. His own foresight was no longer blind. It was now terrifyingly clear. He saw not one future, but two branching pathways. One led to silent, solitary extinction, with the Cathar facing the wave alone, their long history ending as a forgotten data point for the next civilization to ponder, should there be one. The other path was uncertain, shrouded in struggle and a desperate hope, but it was a path he saw them walk alongside the strange, calm, and unexpectedly wise creatures known as humans. Humanity did not present this information as a threat or as a plea for help, Valerius projected, his voice the anchor in the storm of new revelations. They presented it as a problem to be solved. They spent their great contemplation healing themselves, and then they spent it listening to the galaxy. They have been preparing, not for war but for survival. They have extended a hand not in supplication but in partnership. The debate was no longer about whether to trust humanity, but how to integrate with them. How could the Cathar's ancient wisdom, their mastery of energy and matter, be combined with humanity's profound understanding of consciousness and their radical paradigm-shifting science? The first joint council was convened, not in the grand chamber of the Cathar or on the memorial sphere of the humans, but in the neutral space of the void aboard a vessel constructed by both species. The human delegation, led by Ambassador Rostova, was small, calm, and efficient. The Cathar delegation was larger, a reflection of their own complex political structure, but they came with a newfound humility that had been absent for millennia. In the sterile, quiet meeting room, Rostova projected humanity's full findings. We call it the substrate erosion. It appears to be a flaw, or perhaps a feature of this universe's physical laws. Complex information systems, such as consciousness and advanced technology, create a kind of resonance in the fabric of spacetime. Once that resonance reaches a critical galaxy-wide density, it triggers the erosion. The very thing that allows life to become complex and aware is the trigger for its own destruction. It is the ultimate great filter, woven into the code of reality. A Cathar scientist, an aspect of inquiry, pulsed with a question. Then the only way to survive is to never achieve complexity, to remain primitive. That is one solution, Rostova replied, her expression grim. A solution of despair. It is the path of cosmic surrender. We believe there is another. The erosion is a wave, and like any wave, it can potentially be shielded against or perhaps even navigated. Our own inward turn, our great contemplation, was not just philosophical. It reduced our resonance signature significantly. We learned to think more efficiently, to live in harmony with the physical laws instead of fighting against them. We made ourselves quiet not just in radio waves, but in the very substrate of existence. It bought us time, time to listen, time to prepare, and time to find allies. This was the core of it, the final unifying revelation. Humanity's entire civilizational journey, their violent past, their period of silent introspection, their mastery of their own minds, it had all been a desperate, unplanned evolution to make them quiet enough to survive the coming storm. Their ethical and philosophical advancement was a survival trait. Their calmness was not a choice, but a necessity. The alliance was forged. The Cathar, with their vast industrial capacity and deep understanding of stellar-scale engineering, began work on shielding technologies, vast projects designed to create pockets of stable spacetime. The humans, with their mastery of the subtle sciences and their deep, intuitive grasp of the cosmic erosion, guided the research. They became a single, symbiotic intelligence, the old and the new, the logical and the philosophical, united against a common, existential foe. The Orion arm, once a symbol of fear and silence, became a beacon of frantic, hopeful work. The quiet was broken by the hum of vast energies being bent to a single, desperate purpose. In the final scene, Valerius stood with Ambassador Rostova on the command deck of the first joint project vessel, the Horizon. Before them, on a vast holographic display, was the galaxy. It was no longer a collection of territories to be monitored or potential threats to be contained. It was a single, fragile ecosystem, and they were its self-appointed guardians. Faint, almost imperceptible shimmers of the erosion signal were visible at the galaxy's edge, the first signs of the approaching wave. The storm was coming. Your people feared our silence, Rostova said, her thoughts a soft, contemplative murmur beside Valerius's own consciousness. They saw it as a threat, and in a way they were right. It was a sign that we had seen a truth so terrible it demanded our complete and utter attention. A truth that made all our petty squabbles, our ambitions for territory and power, utterly meaningless. Saw a reflection of our own fears, Valerius resonated, his light a deep, thoughtful amber. We are a people who have lived so long that our greatest fear is change, the unpredictable variable. You were the ultimate variable, but we were wrong. The universe itself is the variable. We were trying to impose order on the living when we should have been trying to understand the order of the cosmos. He turned his senses toward the approaching signal, the enemy that could not be reasoned with or intimidated. He felt fear, a deep and primal fear for the survival of everything he had ever known. But for the first time in his long life, it was a fear that was not isolating. It was shared. "There are other civilizations out there," Rostova said, her gaze fixed on the distant starfields. "Still noisy, still fighting their little wars, unaware of the great silence that is coming for them. The wave is not the only disaster. The greater disaster would be to face it alone." The grand, final twist settled into Valerius's mind, a purpose that dwarfed even the monumental task of survival. It was not enough to save themselves. The true measure of their new, combined philosophy, the ultimate test of humanity's hard-won wisdom and the Cathar's ancient strength, would be to save everyone else. Their arrival as a combined force on the galactic stage would not be one of conquest, as the Cathar had once feared of humanity. It would be an arrival of saviors. They would be the messengers, the builders, the guardians. They would have to break the deadly quiet of 1,000 other worlds, not with a warning of war from a neighbor, but with a warning of oblivion from the universe itself. Their desperate work was not just for themselves. It was for every living, thinking being in the galaxy. The deadly quiet before the disaster was over. Now began the desperate, hopeful noise of a galaxy fighting together for the right to a future.